Hey Fit Pros, it's your host Tyler Valencia here. Before we get to this episode, I quickly want to share a free resource we have on the KIPS website and YouTube channel. If you're struggling with your online workouts or just want to see the items that we recommend, check out our virtual training resources page. You'll find breakdowns on streaming setups, reviews on microphones, and other free videos that can help you build your fitness business today. Did I mention they're free? Go check them out at the link in the description or head over to our website to find them under the blog tab. Welcome to the KIPS Podcast. My name is Tyler Valencia, and I have a guest, a friend of mine, on the podcast that we were having a conversation recently about active aging online, those training techniques, those intricacies, and I wanted to have her on the KIPS podcast to talk about these items because it's really rich content for our listeners. So Mary Kennedy is on the podcast. Mary, thank you for coming on.
Oh, Tyler, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Yes. Always great to connect, chat with you. So for the listeners, can you give a brief description of your current business and your educational background?
Sure. I have both an in-person and right now primarily a virtual advanced Agers training company that works both on balance, functional training, and corrective exercise. I have a nursing background, made a transition out of medicine, both from wanting to have a more positive outcome in people's health. And also I had a personal experience of walking through a stage 4 cancer diagnosis and found out personally through that whole experience of back-to-back chemotherapy regimens that health is something that we need to really invest in and put energy in, because you can't get it out of a pill. You can't get it out of an IV. It's a lifestyle and mental management of ourselves so that we can be the best that we can be.
It's so interesting with trends in the fitness industry, education, what's becoming, or hopefully it should be becoming more popular, is with active aging education and even movement. I feel like just knowing you and talking with you about training the active agers, that's one of the big things I see, and it's great. It's almost like a breath of fresh air that you hear people talking about movement and strength. What do you feel like, just from your perspective in your years of being in the industry, how do you feel like the education has changed, evolved for the better?
Beautiful question. And I believe because I've been in the industry over 30 years, we have shifted away from fitness being just how you look and fitness being a medium for the younger folks. And as the baby boomer population has matured into the active aging period of their life, we are some of the biggest consumers of goods and services. And we have been very proactive many times in taking care of ourselves, because we had the luxury of education saying, if you drink a lot and you smoke a lot, you're probably not going to be your best. And so the knowledge that activity was important, and then movement from a number of different but education providers like Ray Institute and Functional Aging Institute and ACE and many others started saying that word function. And function to me is so important. It's if, for example, I was walking my small dog one day and a dog on the other side of the fence started barking. And even though my dog's only 13 pounds, man, she pulled me sideways and I was in my Birkenstock sandals. And, we are more comfortable moving in a forward direction, that sagittal plane.
Mm-hmm.
But boy, if we have a sudden movement in that frontal plane, which is side to side, or the rotational plane, we can sometimes not be as stable.
Mm-hmm.
And I was so glad through all my advanced education beyond just my personal training education that I learned how critical it was to train in that frontal plane and rotational plane, especially for an active ager whose response time, those type 2 muscle fibers, they start to become not quite as active.
Mm-hmm.
And so our reaction time really slows down if we're not actively training for power and speed.
Yeah.
So that taught me big time, it's really important to continue to train, particularly in the active aging period.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like my early memories of working in the fitness industry and even seeing some of these classes, and they might be, I mean, I will admit that the active aging population is not one of my strong suits. Have I read and written papers about the active aging population? Sure. But it's not really something where I've had the hands-on application for it, which I feel like is a big difference. Is the seated resistance band, low weight classes, do you feel like those are still practical, or do we need to see more movement-based strength training classes with the active aging population?
Oh, absolutely. Need more movement-based.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to train for power. We need to train for muscle mass development, because some of the not normal aging, but some of the changes that can happen in aging is if people have been inactive, they start to lose muscle mass. That combined with sensory changes will oftentimes lead a person in their elder years to be much more prone to fall and possibly to have a life-changing injury.
Yeah.
So understanding movement, understanding planes of motion, understanding how to keep an active aging person vital is critical if you're going to work with that population. Because I decided quite a while ago that I wanted to be really good at one population so that I could be the best person serving them for their goals. And so if a trainer who works with a 30-year-old suddenly tries to use the same methods with someone in their 50s or beyond, that 50-year-old body has a lot more road miles, so to speak, on it. And you know what? They may not be able to get down into that squat to the same depth that a 30-year-old or a 20-year-old could. But with some modifications, you can still get all the benefits of squats and power if you just use methods that are better suited for adults over 50.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you hit it right on the nose right there. And the example that was brewing in my head while we're discussing this topic here is a while back, I read a pretty fascinating paper on, we'll call it reaction time training for active agers. And in this paper, they essentially tested the reaction times and basically set up a obstacle course for the participants to walk through, and basically trying to get them to do dual task activities, walking and talking. So those are things that typically diminish as you age, your ability to react to items that come up. Just how you mentioned walking the dog sees another dog on the other side of the street and wants to run after them. How do you react to that? Or if you're walking and talking with a friend or something along those lines, and you kind of, as an individual growing up, you take those for granted, being able to walk and text or walk and talk, things like that. And so when this study was talking about those things, but what it really reminded me of was in a much more advanced version is what's becoming more popular with training athletes and reaction times. And you're not going to essentially take, dual task movements and reaction based activities that you do for high end athletes, but what is maybe a lesser version of that can help progress somebody through that. So I think that what you mentioned with strength training, power, those things are definitely applicable. You just have to be an instructor, be a personal trainer, and modify them for the client sitting in front of you. I think that's the big thing to take away there with strength training, power, reaction time training is you're not going to give an athlete the same activity as an active ager, potentially. Maybe there is that case that you could, but making sure that it's applicable for the person standing in front of you. So very fascinating right there. Those are always my favorite types of topics on the podcast. But let's get back to the big thing I want to talk about, because I know you do this on a weekly basis. You do it and you do it well with the online training with active agers. First question for you, how do you think using Zoom and Zoom growing over the last few years, how do you feel like that's impacted training active agers?
So how has Zoom impacted active agers? What I have found is, since Zoom has been around for really over 2 years now, it is an accepted way of receiving wellness and healthcare services to active agers. Prior to Zoom coming about, that probably would not be a method of receiving goods or services that people would have chosen as an active ager. But these past 2 years have taught all of us as humans how important it is to take care of our bodies, that we are a living, breathing organism, and that we have a certain responsibility to take care of ourselves. And so I have had people reach out to me from other states that wanted to do balance training because they didn't understand what was going on, that they were losing their sense of stability in darker environments, or somebody bumped into them and they suddenly toppled down on the ground. And the beauty of being in the industry long enough and committed to what you do long enough is that your name becomes sort of well known within certain communities. And so the person who reached out to me about balance stuff was more than willing to go through the whole assessment process and history process and actual training online, because they wanted the service, they wanted the expertise, and they wanted to be doing better in their life. And Zoom has just revolutionized, I think, how we deliver services to the active ager. Yeah.
I think that's such a great point and explanation for it, because it opens up those doors that I remember in my undergrad program. There was a section on barriers for training. I don't think active agers was even a term then. I think it was more, I'm trying to think if it was the 55 plus or senior fitness. I think senior fitness was more the term used. But,
right.
But there was a whole section on barriers for working with active agers. And one of those was, sometimes you might need to figure out transportation, or they might need to figure out transportation. That is, if there's a community shuttle, a community bus, do they have a ride to the facility? And right there, Zoom, it eliminates that. It creates that pathway to work with active agers in their home and to get impeccable or top-notch training at home. The same type of training that they would get at a facility, they could get the same thing at home, which I think is a huge step for getting all these types of health benefits that we talk about. So really a good thing and fascinating to think about with how Zoom made it more acceptable. Exactly what you were talking about.
Oh, my goodness. And I've got an example on that. I had some clients in the state of Washington, where I was living at the time, that I was serving in their homes, because that was my model at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And then the pandemic happened, and we started finally working on Zoom together because we knew how important what we were doing was. And her husband had Parkinson's disease, which is a nervous system disorder that you need to be on top of so they don't lose their function.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the thing that they loved about working on Zoom was they didn't have to go out. They were getting exactly the same kind of direction and attention.
Yeah.
If not sometimes even better, because both of us were working so hard to make sure we were communicating clearly. They were finding the benefits of it. And one of the things that happened as a result of that is, even though I'm no longer in Washington, they are still my clients that
Amazing.
I'm working with every week.
Yeah. Amazing.
And they love it.
Yeah. Yeah. That's the kind of stuff that we work for in this industry. We love to hear those stories, and to the fact that it's continuing, because we're helping populations, individuals that potentially there was that barrier there, that where do I start? Where do I go? How do I find somebody? And despite being states away, it's something that's accessible. So I really think it's such a great tool for fit pros if they can adapt it and create something that works for them. I think that's a good segue into our next question here, is figuring out ways to make it work for them, because I'm sure there are fitness pros listening to this episode that are in the same boat with, well, how do I do certain things? How do I cue somebody? And the question I'm going to have for you is, how do you adapt your assessment for online training? Because I'm guessing there's people out there, I can't do my normal assessment. How do I even do that online? What are some things that you could share with the audience?
Oh my goodness, you're saying what I was thinking at the time before I started it. I once I got over the shock of, okay, how do I make this work? I started looking for things that were standardized assessments that could define measurable results. And I began using those tools to do my movement assessments. However, because my assessments with a new client are usually about 2 hours, I found, especially when you're working so intensely on Zoom and focusing, that it worked out better to actually break my sessions up into 2 parts over 2 different days. So the first session that I arrange with people is where we're going over history and family history and all those questions we ask about all the different systems in their body, what medications they're on, and mostly, and most importantly, what is it that the client wants to achieve as a result of working together. So I review all that information prior to my next session with someone, where I actually go through standardized tests that will give me really solid information on how that person is functioning as an active ager. So I do things like 8-foot up and go walk test and single leg balance test and CTSIBs, which are for balance, to show the different contributions of the different senses in our sense of balance. And I explain each test ahead of time briefly. I demonstrate what the movement will be. I explain if there's going to be timing involved. And for things where there might be a tendency to be a little off balance, I factor in as much safety as possible. An example is if I'm doing a single leg balance test on someone who hasn't been actively exercising in a while, I put them standing in front of a corner where 2 walls are coming together, so that if they would tend to get a little bit off balance, they've got 2 walls behind them and beside them. And then I have them put like a dining room chair in front of them so that they are surrounded with safety. And an amazing thing, particularly for an active ager, is if your body experiences a sense of safety, it will give you more movement. So I build that into the assessments that I do with people. And I am always making sure to let them know how well they're doing, because it's a very different environment to be tested in virtually as opposed to being in a gym if they've ever had an assessment before. So I'm always letting people know how well they're doing and how useful all this is. And out of those 2 sessions with someone, I come up with very usable information that helps the client and myself get them to the end result they're looking for.
I feel like what you mentioned there with the wall is so important, not just because you broke it down there, but creating that environment for an assessment. How do you create the environment for your client online for them to perform some of these things that are probably foreign or they might be intimidated by? How do you create that experience for them that they can go through it, that you get the feedback, the information that you need in order to create an individualized program? So I feel like that's a great example right there for people listening, because it's being creative with the spaces, with the technology, and also the experience of the end user, the consumer. So with this assessment, it might take some time to say, hey, we're going to be doing XYZ during the first couple sessions, that you might need to find an area in your house in order to perform these. Do you feel like that communication, do you usually have that type of communication before an assessment?
Absolutely. I always want people to know what to expect next. And once they know what they're supposed to be doing ahead of time, and I also even am reminding them what kind of clothes to wear for it. Mm-hmm. And that since I'm going to be observing how their body's moving, I need some contrasting pieces of clothing on their body, and not real baggy t-shirts, but more close-fitting t-shirts for both men and women, so that I can see what's happening with the trunk of their body as they're moving. How much rotation are they getting? That I can see if they've got a shift in their pelvis as they're squatting. All those things are really important. And since you're looking through your screen, everything that I as a practitioner can make my job easier by informing them what I need, what they will need to do, and how they can dress, so that I can best get a sense of how their body is moving right now. It makes everything so much easier. Those
are such unique items. And I know we've talked about this before, but with the contrasting colors, I've heard it before with instructors talking about when they're filming workouts, when they want to make sure that they don't blend into the background. But another piece with teaching and doing online training with clients and with your outfit, and the being able to have that go through the screen, go through whatever mode that they are seeing it. That is a piece that I remember, again, going back to my undergrad, when talking about working with active agers, with facility management. Well, it was something that was talked about, that you don't want to have contrast or colors that blend into the background in terms of, it was always the crease in the wall. So you don't want a gym floor color to be the same as the wall, because if you have a population that their eyesight is diminishing, you don't want them to have to question where is the wall? Where is that? Does it even start? A bad step, as we're talking about, might be a bad step that ends to some type of injury. So having colors that don't blend into each other is such a key piece there. Now applying that to training online with active agers, we're talking about your outfit. Same concept right there, which I think is so fascinating for the listeners. with the next question here, now with your cueing, because I feel like that's one of the things that if you're an instructor that's more hands-on, if you're or a manual manipulator where you're walking around touching, saying, hey, this is where you want to feel it. How has your cueing and your teaching style changed in that aspect?
I have been more thoughtful about how to effectively get the information across to someone who may not be hearing me properly or seeing me properly. So my directions are very concise. I speak just a little bit slower than I normally would if I was standing right beside someone. And my demonstrations are a combination of me speaking and moving and even pointing to the parts of my body that are the areas I want to have the client feel the activation in. So I'm saying, we're getting your glute medius right now with this, and I'm pointing to where that is on my body. And then when they start doing the movement, asking them, is that where they're feeling that movement? I want to be as clear as possible. And if they're not quite getting it, because sometimes some of the medications that a portion of the active agers are possibly taking for issues like high blood pressure, they can sometimes slow down their mental processing speed a little bit. Mm-hmm. So I am asking them also, did I make this clear enough for you? Do I need to say it a different way? And so it's a slightly slower dialogue. I'm not screaming at the person, but I'm speaking clearly and always looking for feedback from them on how well I've communicated what I'm asking them to do.
That is, I think, very relevant with a lot of the things with online workouts that I know that I've talked about with instructors that I work with. Is the communication has definitely improved for instructors that work online to also doing in person, is that their communication has drastically improved because they realized I'm going to use a group exercise example here, but I just can't use music to overshadow my communication. Online, I have to communicate. I have to keep talking, motivating, and cueing through things. And I just can't just turn up the music and say, come on. So it's one of those things where communication styles have really improved. And I think it's a huge positive because it just makes you a better instructor. And so that what you mentioned with, now you are pointing on your body and you are communicating and teaching almost, which I feel like is a great aspect of a good trainer, is that they educate at the same time. They're educating their clients so they become more experienced, more knowledgeable in these areas. So I think it's a win-win with online. All the things we're talking about here, that's another win in the bucket over there. So let's talk about now with your business, because I'm sure that that's something that instructors have potentially struggled with how do they grow it? What are those things that I can do to find a market online? First of all, what has been some of your favorite aspects of growing an online business?
The biggest thing was I had to mentally decide it was okay for me to be excited about what I was doing. Mm-hmm. And that I was, first of all, helping people with what I was doing, that I was serving them living better lives. And if I failed to talk to folks, then I was potentially depriving them of the ability to improve the quality of their life, not only now, but later. And I enlisted the help of a very smart man who helped me develop an online presence. And then I found that there was another step that I needed to do in addition, and that was to start to network beyond just my circle of influence in my communities. I started doing things like joining the Chamber of Commerce. I joined a BNI group. I joined a group of retired nurses. And in all these different groups, I got the opportunity to tell my story about who I was, who I was serving, and how I was serving them in under 30 seconds. Mm-hmm. So I became very concise in what my company name was and what I did. And so the online presence that was created was a validation to folks who perhaps heard me speak at different events or that I networked with at a chamber event. And they were going, wow, she must be really, and I had a number of people say, you must be really serious about this. Mm-hmm. You've got a Facebook page, you've got a Instagram page, you've got a YouTube channel. Mm-hmm. And all those things together are part of how effectively getting your story out there and ultimately serving people online by having an online presence.
Yeah. What's interesting to me is a lot of these things are still what has been talked about for years in terms of how do you build your business. I think some people might get caught up with, well, I just need to do my online stuff. I need to make ads, but you do a lot of the things where your audience is. You're going to BNI, you're going to different types of networking opportunities that create those opportunities to get a lead, get a client, and talk about your story that connect with your audience. I feel like that's the important takeaway right there, is that people that are potentially in your niche, that figuring out where do they go to purchase things, where and how can I get in front of more of them, or how can I get a lead or somebody in a network to put me in front of more people. You do those things and it pays off. I feel like not forgetting those items if you're working with this population is the key right there. So very good and fascinating items right there, Miss Mary. Next thing that I want to chat about with going online and the growth of that business is with content and putting yourself out there with, and it's not a fault at all. Technology is a beast, as I say, it's a beast of itself. For you, what has that been? How has that been learning Zoom, learning cameras and all that kind of stuff?
I think if I would have been approaching these things as a 35 or 45-year-old person, it might have been more natural, comfortable, or understandable for me. But when my experience was not comfortable, manageable, or any of those things, it was uncomfortable at times. And I struggled with issues like how to make sure my whole body was in a frame when I was in front of the camera so that my client could see my feet and what they were doing, how to modulate volume, and understanding that I needed microphones that were appropriate to pick up my voice without hearing the when I was saying a P word. Mm-hmm. That those investments, if I was truly committed to serving active agers online, then I needed to invest in my business. I have the luxury of not having the overhead of a gym. Mm-hmm. But I needed very specific tools to be able to deliver my message. And so a good phone with a good camera on it. And like I said, the microphones were really important. Having extra lighting, because you never know what the weather's going to be outside.
Yeah.
So being able to again, for an active ager who may be visually impaired slightly, having good lighting so they can see every part of my body as it's moving is so important and makes such a difference.
Yeah. Yeah. It's such good feedback for listeners, because I feel like some might think, oh, it's technology. It's not for me, or I might be too old for it, or
No.
it's going to take too long. But it's part of your business. The way that I always translate it is, if you want to do online training, just how you said, you got to invest in it. And it's just like when you teach maybe a class, you teach a group exercise class, how you go to a class, there's all these things, your setup. You typically show 5-10 minutes early. You're putting your music on, you're connecting your phone, you're putting it on silent mode, you're turning on the lights, putting your equipment out, all that kind of stuff for a class. It's your pre-setup. Your pre-setup, you still have that process with online, but it's a little different. You have your camera, maybe you have a light, you have your microphone, you are checking your volumes, all these different things for this class or a training session. But it's still part of your pre-setup. You just got to figure out, what's my pre-setup for this session. And it's sometimes almost apples to apples, sometimes apples to oranges. Like we're talking about with the assessments, with your cues, you're having to think about it a little bit more. How can I communicate this better through online? But you're still doing a lot of the same things. You're still an instructor. You can still perform a great session. So really just making sure that if you're listening and you're an instructor in that boat, don't overthink it with some of these items. You're still going to do a lot of those. Just got to be creative sometimes. So we're going to get to the podcast takeaways. And I love this part of the podcast, be able to get more information, more feedback, more advice from our guests. So Mary, the question that a lot of guests get is, what are 3 myths about the fitness industry?
This is a really fun question.
Mm-hmm.
First is that fitness is only for youth. And actually, fitness in my belief system, and I'm a little biased because I'm over 50, fitness is even more critical for someone in the active aging population, because it has a very real impact in the quality of their life today, next week, and next month. So myth number 1, it's not all just about 20 and 30-year-olds.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, gyms are the best place to deliver services. Absolutely not. Especially for an active ager. Can you imagine if you couldn't see very well and you forgot your glasses in the locker room because you're nervous in a gym, and you're going into a big workout floor where there's weights all over the floor and stuff, and you trip, and you're older than a lot of the people that are perhaps in the gym, you're at such a disadvantage, and the music's loud and all that stuff. Whereas in online training, active agers don't have to deal with any of that stuff. Yeah. They're in the convenience of their own homes. So gyms are not always the best place to deliver fitness services. And secondly, it sort of goes on with the idea of it's not all about aesthetics, especially when you're over 50. Mm-hmm. Certainly, there is a broad spectrum of people and their functional capacity when they're over 50. But what all of us are thinking more of when we become active agers is, am I going to be able to keep myself safe, independent, and enjoying my life as long as I can now that I've worked so many years to get here? Mm-hmm. Or am I going to be paying somebody else money that I worked very, very hard for to help me in an assisted living facility when really I don't want to live there? I'd like to stay in my home. Mm-hmm. So it's not just about the looks, that last one. It's about quality of life, particularly for my population.
That's a good one. Very good one. The one I'm going to comment on here is that the second one with the gym and not always being the best place. to work with a population. I feel like that's something that is a good summary of this episode, how Zoom, online training, working out at home has really created an eye-opening situation for a lot of people, not just active agers, but a lot of people. It's something that I think I've shared on the podcast before, how I've worked out at home for years because I feel like it's a convenience that I save time. That 15-minute drive to the gym. Do I still have a gym pass? Yes, I do. But I save 15 minutes driving there, driving back, 30 minutes right there of my day that I could put somewhere else, spending time with my wife, spending time with my cats, spending time doing whatever it is that relaxing, whatever it is that I want. So I feel like people have seen, oh, wow, I can get a quality session workout at home. And there's a lot of options out there that are afforded to me. So great little summary right there to get us to the end of the podcast here. Mary, before we sign off here, can you share your social media links and information about yourself?
You bet. My website is www.restoration-fitness.com. My email address is m.draper105@gmail. And going into my website are links to my Facebook page, my Instagram, and my YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm. Great stuff. Really great stuff in this episode. Useful stuff that people can take away, apply right away, which is what we want. So thank you again for being my guest, Mary.
Oh, thank you so much, Tyler. It's my pleasure.